Great. Well, thank you all for being here today. My name is Patty DiBartolo. I am the current chair of the Leadership and Elections Committee. And I'm just going to do some brief introductions, talk about our agenda for today, and then hand off for some fuller introductory remarks before we present some information for level setting for the conversation and get to really the heart of the meeting today, which is to hear input and suggestions and questions from you all. Again, I'm Patty DiBartolo. I am the outgoing chair of Leadership and Elections. This is the end of my 3-year term. I've served on the committee for 6 years total. I also wanted to introduce Angela Fang. Angela, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. I'm the incoming L&E chair, and I've been coming to ABCT since I was fresh out of college. So that's, yeah, I'm really excited to be in this role. Thanks.
Great. And then I'd also like to allow Laura Seligman an introduction. So Laura, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, my name is Laura Seligman, obviously. I am the current president of ABCT, although I will be handling over the mantle in November. And I guess I too have been coming to ABCT since almost straight out of college, which at this point is more years than I'm really going to admit to today. So it's good to see you all here today.
Wonderful. So here generally is the agenda for today. Laura is going to lead us through some introduction to the topic at hand, why it is we're running this town hall, why L&E has engaged in the work in which it's engaged. I'm going to talk a little bit about just some agreements about how we're going to run the town hall, just so we level set. And then I'm going to present a little bit on behalf of the L&E committee. We should also say that the third member of Leadership and Elections is in attendance here, Simon Rigo. And so we are here full force to listen to what it is you have to say in feedback to us. So we are going to tell you a little bit about how we currently run that nomination elections process, just in case it's not entirely familiar to you. And then we're going to engage in some benchmarking, that is, share with you some research that ABCT has done to investigate how other allied or similar organizations run their own nomination and election processes, give you basically the sense of how ABCT compares in that benchmarking, and make some potential recommendations about things we may want to consider moving forward. And then we're going to talk about voting and levels of participation, our current processes, and open up to questions and concerns. That's your thoughts and input with some guiding questions. And then we'll talk about next steps and what you could expect to hear back from both the board and from the L&E committee writ large. So I'm going to pass the mic to Laura Seligman, who's going to start us off, and I'll return back in just a few minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Patty. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. This is our second town hall. And obviously we're doing this because this is a topic that I feel like is really important for the organization's future. I'm not exactly sure how much people know about the way the organization runs. So I kind of wanted to give you a little bit of a brief overview, which is that central office, so that by that I mean Mary Jane Eimer, who's here with us today, and her staff. Central office is responsible for the day-to-day running of the organization, but it's the board of directors that is in the role of setting the strategy and the direction, the overall direction, and the kind of looking to the future for the organization. So who ends up on the board of directors is really an important issue in terms of how power is distributed and how power gets used in the organization. And so that's why I've asked Patty and Angela to do this town hall and to look into this issue today, so we could get this discussion started, because this is so key to how we run as an organization. So I kind of want to back up a little bit to how this topic got on the table. And when I first joined the board, or really even before I was officially on the board, I joined the strategic planning that is done, strategic planning meeting that's done every 3 years. And at that meeting, we had a consultant, and that person brought up, and I think maybe some of these conversations had already been ongoing at this point before I joined the board. But the consultant had brought up the fact that a lot of organizations were moving away from the elections process, or at least the elections process as we do it. And I was really surprised to hear that. And I have to admit, like, I was a little bit guarded, or I had some real concerns about that, because I think of elections, like many people do, as a democratic process and the way for everyone's voice to get heard. But I think that the consultant that we work with did make a compelling case that a lot of times elections are, the participation rate isn't very high. There's also a good deal of research that I was familiar with coming into ABCT about that different people, there's a select group of people who are willing to put themselves out there and volunteer for things like an organization-wide election. And so there were some questions about really whether this is the best way to give people access to power. So I asked Angela or Patty to take, if her committee could take a look into investigating what are some options. Now, in the process of doing that, as we were getting started and do this conversation started with the backdrop of, I think, really having kind of in the background and some understanding about some displeasure, or, the need to pay attention to the power structure in the organization. And then obviously this year that became more of an issue. So the discussion didn't start in reaction to that, but I think that some of the things that have happened this year, some of the things that we've struggled with and the questions we've been asking ourselves as a board of directors, or the board of directors has been asking ourselves, made it more important for me to start moving this conversation along and get membership feedback. So that's where we are right now. We do know some things, however, and Patty and Angela know more than me, so I'm going to let them speak to those specifics. But we do know that there are some issues with our elections. Like many other elections, we have low participation rates. And I think at ABCT, but not specifically to ABCT, there's an issue about when people run for office and they don't get elected, they tend to become disengaged from the organization, which is really not what we're looking for, right? Because a lot of times when somebody loses an election, it's not because, I think sometimes the interpretation is what they do isn't valued by the organization, or they're not valued by the organization. So they kind of disengage. And often, most cases, I think that's the opposite of the truth. But sometimes you have like an embarrassment of riches, and sometimes we've been really lucky at ABCT to have that, and you have really good candidates and you can only pick one. And so there are some issues that we would like to make sure we address. And so we started looking at different options like that Patty and Angela are going to share with you in a little bit. But I want to make sure that you understand that this is not one of these situations where we've kind of made up our minds and are just kind of having this discussion to give people a chance to say something, and then we're going to roll out what we already had in mind anyway. We are, what I would say, is early in the process, although I say that, and at the same time, I really want to acknowledge that Patty's group, the Elections and Leadership Committee, has done a lot of work and a lot of research, but we're early in the decision-making process. And so, and we know that we have some expertise, but that there's a lot more expertise in the membership. And so that's really what today is about, is to give you some information, share with you what we've learned, but also a major part of what today is about is to benefit from the wisdom in our membership, and to hear from you and to get your reactions and your ideas, or maybe some ideas that we haven't even thought of. As we do that, I just wanted to go over some of the agreements that are really just focused on making sure that everybody has a chance to participate, everyone who gets a chance to say what they want to, if you would like to speak up, and that along with that, if you do have something to say, that you feel comfortable saying it. So these are kind of what we are suggesting as agreements for how we run today's meeting. Of course, I put raise your hand, but I think is that available as an option, Dakota?
No, I don't think so. But people, oh yeah, no, that is still an option, but people are also have the ability to unmute themselves as well.
All right, so you'll be able to unmute yourself, but just so that, you know, I think ideally you would raise your hand, your virtual hand, so that we know that you're waiting to speak, so you could be recognized. The second one is just be kind. Again, Angela and Patty are going to be speaking with you today, but they're not experts in election process. They've done a lot of work to make themselves experts, but keep that in mind. And just be mindful of how much space you're taking up. And by that, we just mean to make sure that we want to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak if they would like to. And I think the next one is really important. Like, some ideas might not feel really, you know, they might be new. And, you know, there's plenty of research about how something that's unfamiliar can be uncomfortable, but we're asking you to consider some uncomfortable things if maybe in the long run, those might be better. And beware of power differentials and dynamics, which is a lot of what we're talking about today. Be respectful of different views and opinions. Like we said, we really want to make sure that we hear from everybody, even if everybody doesn't agree with us or with each other. And then remember, we don't have all the answers. Like I said, one of the major points today is not for us to give you answers, but to hear from you. So with that, I would like to just ask if there's any other suggestions for how we run the meeting today, or it looks like there's something in the chat. Maybe that was.
I think that was just me clarifying the hand raising feature.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so if there's no other suggestions, then I'm going to turn it back to Patty. Thank you.
Thank you. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about our current process and benchmarking. And one thing that I want to make clear really early on is that LNE, I think, has been happy to take up much of this investigation, because for a while we've been feeling like the process has not been working as well or as easily as we would like it to. So I just wanted to make that point, that in fact, feel free to levy criticism of how the process has been going from your perspective, because we similarly have had a variety of moments where we've thought this is not as effective as we'd like it to be. So, but in case you're not aware, the current nomination and election, we have a nomination process that leads to our election slate. The annual election process is overseen by the appointed members of the Leadership and Elections Committee, myself, Angela, and Simon. And we are independent of the board, but report to the board through the membership arm of the organization. We are an appointed committee, so need to be approved by the board, but run basically independently and report to the board how the candidates, how the election is going, et cetera. Our current policy is that we are charged with finding 2 candidates to stand for each open board position. Every year, that includes our president-elect and a representative at large. And every 3rd year, we're also filling the slate for our secretary-treasurer position. The way that the slates are created is through a nomination process. So there is an open call. Generally, we launch each election cycle. Most recently, by the June, Behavior Therapist is our official launch. The chair of the Leadership and Elections Committee writes a column that is accompanied by the elections form to tell people that the portal is open for the nominations. Nominations period is open from June through September 1st. We connect with through social media, through member-wide emails, and those kinds of things in order to let people know that the election process or the nomination process is underway. We then, all nominations go to the home office, and as of September 1, we look at the list of nominees, and the candidates with the top 2 number of nominations for each position are contacted by the chair of LNE and asked if they want to run. That's how we put the slate together. Then the rest of this is going to be more transparent. We gather information from the candidates and officially launch the season most recently between November 1st and November 30th, where members are voting during the entirety of the month. And then on the 30th, the election closes and the candidate with the most votes for each position is then named a board member. So both the nomination election processes are intended to be democratic, that is, to be open to those members who by our bylaws are allowed to nominate and vote, and to be competitive. We are supposed to be finding 2 candidates for each position so that one wins the position and the other person does not. And just to be clear at the front end, any changes we make to this elections process, as I just described it, will likely require a bylaw vote. Some pieces of this, like the number of candidates, are in our policy, not our bylaw, but we expect that this is going to need to go to the membership for endorsement if we make some substantive change. So we wanted to highlight just a couple of things that have caused us concern in the last few years. And maybe I should start with the asterisk down below, which is that in 2 of the last 4 election cycles, we failed in our mission to deliver a full slate of candidates for every position. And that was despite considerable effort. But what that does mean is that we did not even have enough nominated candidates to fill 2 positions, 2 candidates or for each slot, each open board position. And it meant that what the committee ended up doing was we were soliciting people who might be interested in potentially nominating or engaging in a bid. But even despite all those efforts, kind of the open call for nominees and LNE seeing that there was kind of an anemic response and trying to find people who've been involved in the organization and putting out, invitations, or has anyone considered, and increase its kind of calls to SIGs and so on and so forth, still found that there were a couple of years where we had candidates run unopposed. And so here are some of the challenges that we think led to that issue. And they're complicated and probably all occurring to some degree at once simultaneously. First off, what we're really finding is that individuals who are nominated or who LNE has had informal conversations about running have talked about the incredible demand on their time and attention personally and professionally. This, of course, has been exacerbated by the pandemic, but it pre-existed the pandemic. So everyone's overstretched. Our members are engaged in actually a variety of incredible activities, grants, research, teaching, business development, leadership, career advancement, business development in their private practice or institutional leadership or development. We also have many who are serving a multiplicity of professional organizations, ABCT being just one of them. And I'll just give you a brief sense of those. The ones that have been mentioned to us have been like close to a dozen, but APA, ISTSS, ADIA, CUD-CUP, ABPP, but those goes on and on. I talked to you about pandemic. Pandemic obviously has stretched people additionally more thinly, and that has been borne disproportionately by certain members of the organization, often women, people of color. And increasingly, we've heard about health and family concerns as being part of the reason for an inability or a disinterest in running for election. And as we have been charged by both kind of the strategic intent of the organization and our own interest in trying to diversify the candidates for election, we found that, not surprisingly to many of you, those individuals who would bring a diversity of perspectives and defined in a whole variety of ways are often experiencing kind of lots of competition and demand on their times and have to be really selective about the choices that they make. So that's the competition for talent and attention. And then there are other barriers to considering a competitive bid. So if someone's potentially interested in serving ABCT more fully, there are lots of barriers we've heard. Some of them have been that individuals have told us that their observation is that researchers, high-profile researchers tend to get elected more frequently than clinicians do. And there has been, there sometimes have even been times when individuals understanding through the personal grapevine, professional grapevine, that a high profile, however you define that, individual is running for a particular position, that can sometimes seem to dissuade other individuals from throwing their hat in the ring. Sometimes because some of what we love about ABCT is that we are a close-knit organization, and we often, through years of getting involved in it, we become collegial and friendly with many people. So sometimes there are issues with people not wanting to run against friends or close personal colleagues. And Laura has already previewed another issue, which is one of the things that I think our committee was most concerned about, which is that we waste talent in every election. That is, that we pluck half of the individuals who are willing to serve the organization and put them on our board of directors, and the other two individuals are often then no longer engaged in the organization, even though they're well poised to do so. They're committed to the mission of the organization, and they really are, they have wonderful talents to offer us. And that for us has been one of the biggest concerns that we've had over time. So let me tell you a little bit about the benchmarking we did. So this was actually, I have to give thanks here to Linda Firm, who is a consultant hired by the board to help us with a kind of a critique and review of our governance structures, paired with Mary Jane Eimer, ABCT's executive director, went to allied professional organizations. And here's a list I'm sharing with you, to interview and engage in correspondence in order to gather data on nonprofit leadership and how these other allied institutions engage in the nomination and elections process. And here's what we generally found, is that ABCT kind of stands alone in the ways in which our elections are competitive. Instead, what most of those allied organizations do is they have a nominations committee that is charged with putting together a slate of candidates that usually that is created through kind of an application and interview process that tries to retain talent as much as possible. And that slate is put forward by the nominating committee to the board, and then usually to the membership for an up-down vote. So it's, I guess there is competition because there are only so many slots available, but the charge of the nominating committee is to try to seek, retain, and expand the talent pool as much as possible. As I mentioned, the endorsement of the slate goes through a vetting process through both, in some places it's the board, often it's the membership with an up-down vote. And here's, of course, where the devil is in the details. We would need to articulate what that process would look like. We are really sensitive to the fact that our democratic process allows a certain level of transparency, and we don't want this to seem like it's a more opaque process and in control and being controlled by a smaller number of individuals, where people feel like what they're seeing getting generated in the leadership and in the leadership slate is not what they're looking for. So we would need to articulate what that process would look like. That's something we haven't started doing because we wanted to take temperature first about how this idea of a non-competitive slate landed, and to hear your questions or concerns as we think about how we would move this forward if in fact there seemed to be some interest. One last thing I want to talk about is voting. And we have also been concerned, if you consider voting kind of a marker of healthy membership engagement and how robust the candidates, the leadership, the candidates that are put forward in a slate tend to be viewed by the membership. I think we had a series of concerns here as well. So we have seen diminishing rates of voting recently, and this was even pre-pandemic. In about the almost 50 years in which we have data participation rates, we find that 4 of the 5 lowest voter turnouts, fewer than 20% of those eligible to vote, have voted in the last 5 years. And this has been despite considerable efforts on the part of both central office and the Leadership and Elections Committee to think about how we might better make it easier to vote, more time efficient, et cetera. So some examples of things that we've tried in the past, we put a station available at our annual meeting. This was pre-pandemic, so that people, when given all the momentum and buzz at our annual meeting, that people who hadn't had a chance to vote yet could do it right on site in a moment in which they might be particularly interested and engaged with the organization. Since that time, you've also been involved in, this is through incredible efforts in the central office staff to have online balloting. And beginning last year, you may have noticed that you got a personalized email reminder that came into your inbox, which allowed you to kind of press a button and be immediately brought to the voting portal with reminders to do that. So we thought that some of these improvements might actually begin to boost our participation rate, but we are not seeing any appreciable improvements. We have been thinking about the fact that we can that perhaps membership renewal is a little too close to our annual election cycle. And if we decoupled them so that we had membership get resolved annually sooner, and then a few months later introduce our election cycle, we think maybe a shift in that calendar might be helpful. And I just wanted to share, as of yesterday, there's feedback I want to already note, which is that we have heard many of the individuals organizing this town hall from some SAKE leaders who have suggested that ABCT take up eligibility for voting and nominations that are articulated in our bylaws, and in particular to expand that to include our student members. And they are not currently eligible, I would say, given our longstanding bylaws to either vote or to nominate. So here are the questions that our committee has for you, and I'll read them out loud and then see if anyone who has helped me to shepherd through this process and provide this information to you, to see if anyone has any other suggestions or wants to make any corrections to what I've said thus far. But here's really what we'd love to hear more from you about: what suggestions you have about what might need to change in the current elections process. What are your reactions or suggestions or concerns that you might have if we were to move to more of a slate model? How could ABCT enhance voter participation? And we're really interested in hearing from you on all counts. And I guess before we do that, does Angela, Mary Jane, Linda, Laura, Dakota, do you have anything? Simon, do you have anything you wanted to add before we open up the floor for feedback?
No, I just wanted to say thank you for setting that stage for us. I know it was a lot of information, but I think it's helpful so that we're not talking about different things during the discussion.
Yes, good point. I've been living this for 6 years. So if anyone needs me to go over any piece or to clarify, I'd be happy to do that. Yeah. Okay, so if no other comments, then Dakota, why don't you help anyone else?
Yeah, Linda has something.
Sorry, go right ahead, Linda.
I just wanted to add a really quick note that when we did our research to see what other affiliated and like-minded nonprofit organizations did in relation to nominations and elections, we also went through the American Society of Association Executives, which did a similar study. So it reached probably over 200 organizations, and many of those were also like-minded organizations relative to ABCT. So it's a larger, we had interviews with 8 groups, but it was a much larger intake.
Great context. Thank you, Linda, for that. Okay, so I think the floor is now open. Dakota, I'm going to yield I'm going to yield to you, because I'm screen sharing. It's hard for me to see who may have a raised hand. We're here to
Yeah.
listen.
Yeah, you can just end the screen share if you're comfortable, or
Sure.
I guess you can keep those questions up to you.
I'll leave them up for a few minutes. How
Okay.
about that? Oh, sorry, I'll go back.
Yeah, anyway, oh, I see some hands, sorry.
Great.
Let's see, Colleen, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Thanks. So it's just, thanks for hosting this town hall. Of the other organizations that you're describing that are, similar to us in some kind of domain and that you researched, do they have, like, I guess when they were formerly maybe doing election processes, did they allow, do they have different, I guess, eligibility for who could vote? Or is it more expanded than where we are now in our organization?
Mary Jane and Linda, I might defer to you on that question. I'm not
Okay,
sure
can
that
you
I know the answer.
The question?
I think the question is do they, like, who can vote? And that isn't what we focused on. We
Yeah,
focused on the
yes.
nomination. So legitimate question that we can go back and find out.
Well, I think that's a little, I'm sorry.
We
but I
did,
think-
but the 8 people that we interviewed, and they were hour-long conversations, so they weren't very short conversations. The executive directors went into great detail as to why they made the switch to a slate, what proved to be beneficial, and what didn't. But relative to your question,
We didn't ask that question.
we didn't ask that specific question, but they did volunteer information to say that there was still a call for nominations so that people could nominate themselves or nominate someone else. And the voting process was, you voted, there was a voting process. All of them did do a vote, but it was a vote to accept the slate. If that clarifies it.
Yeah, that's helpful. I definitely find myself in the camp of wanting to expand eligibility to voting. And so I wonder if we're actually getting, skewed results if these other organizations are only allowing a numerical minority of members to vote on change in processes.
Well, we can certainly go back, Colleen, to the groups that, that are listed in one of the earlier that we have relationships with and ask, and we can find out from the ASAE if that question was raised.
Sure.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Lorenzo, you have your hand up. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, is there, so that you talked about kind of uncoupling the membership and like distancing it from voting. Is there a way to like couple it more? Because I think sometimes one of the best ways to get people to do stuff is when they're already doing something. I don't know, maybe I don't think about the dates carefully enough to think about how it relates, but in research I'm involved with, that's an easy way to get people to do stuff. If they're already going to sign a form, then you have them sign another form, for example.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
But can
Patty.
I ask a follow-up question, Lorenzo, if I might, could you tell me, I love your point about once people are engaged, maybe we could ask them to engage in multiple ways. From your perspective as a member, are there particular ways in which you would imagine it would be relatively easy to put yourself forward in nominating or to
It's
vote?
more about voting, really.
Voting, okay.
Although I guess it could, now that you mentioned it, it's a good idea to think about it for the other things like putting yourself forward, right?
Yeah, we did talk a little bit about, and so I think it would be useful. At one point, we floated the notion that perhaps when you complete your annual dues form that there might be a box that you could check saying, are you interested in getting involved in governance? Or might there be a way to link that with voting or something along those lines to think about that? So any feedback that any of you might provide about how you would like to see it would be useful as we're thinking about how to create efficiencies in your busy lives.
Yeah, if I can keep talking, the example I was thinking of is we do a lot of surveys with college students and they get a lot of surveys already, right? So the turnout rate is actually, like you said, around 10 to 20%. And universities that have good, in a project that I'm involved with, the universities that have rates that are much higher are the ones that ask the students to do the survey when they're already doing some kind of university requirement, like, when they're first signing up for the healthcare or something like that.
That's great. We can think more about what those moments might be that would most engage the membership in various kinds of ways. Thank you.
So I'm wondering, can we capitalize on the ABCT app, on the Congress app or something? Because I really love that platform and I enjoy using it. So thinking about just going through that as a way, because then that's easy, that's in my hand, I'm already using it during, and then I can just, there could be like, it's fun actually to go through the categories and who's there and what's not, and then it could just be another tab on the left side to be like elections, and I'm like, cool, it's like a game almost, like gamifying it. I don't know.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I'll just add that is something that is relatively easy to implement as well. So I'll definitely write that down. Talk with Stephen, our convention manager, about that. Yeah, Taryn.
Hey, everybody. So I just wanted to circle back around to the idea, and it sounds like people are in support of it, of letting students vote. And I was wondering if anyone knew the historical reason why they're not allowed to vote, and what it would take to change that.
I think I could.
I actually was going to say, I don't know that I have the longest view, but this has been a part of our bylaws for quite some period of time. And it would require a bylaw change, but we've done it before and we can do it again. And we might see this being kind of a potentially, if this were something we were going to move forward, we would need to think about how to maybe package the series of changes so that maybe we wouldn't put them all together, but we could decouple them, because there may be parts of it that have tremendous, kind of momentum and interest, and other pieces less so. So we can think of these things as potentially separable, but I don't know, Laura, were you going to answer, or Mary Jane? I imagine you might have the longest view.
Laura, you can go first.
Well, I'm not sure I was going to add anything more than what Patty said. I think that the short answer is no, I don't know where that working, but I think that it predated many of us. And then I think, like Patty said, the one thing I do know is that that's a membership decision. So there's some things that the board can make changes on, and there's some things we can't. One thing we can't change is the bylaws. So the bylaws go to a full membership vote. So since that's in the bylaws, that would be up to all of you, not up to us.
And I can just say, historically, students have not been eligible to hold office or to vote or to nominate. But I inherited that, so I not know. But one would think that some of it is just time to revisit the issue, because we're as you know, we're celebrating our 56th annual convention this November, so it might be time to take a deeper dive.
Yeah, Ilana.
Oh yeah, and thank you, Taryn, for circling back to the student piece. I know that Jeff and I have already sent folks lots of emails about this very topic, but just wanted to kind of highlight how now that we do have student members leading SIGs, for example, it doesn't really make sense if the previous reason was that students couldn't hold leadership roles. That's why they didn't have voting privileges. that it may be time to change that. I think also the point around diversity in our leadership of the organization, right? We know that our student membership is a lot more kind of racially and ethnically diverse than perhaps our full membership is. And so by not kind of allowing students to stay involved in the organization from that early stage, then you may not be encouraging kind of lifelong membership in ABCT and continued involvement. So just something to consider. Thanks.
Yeah, Lorenzo.
It's probably preaching to the choir at this point or in this room in the way that I see people nodding their heads, but we recently have in our program made an effort to add students to a lot of our committees and have them be participating more. And I've been quite surprised by how good it has been in general, because the students are not as busy as we are, and the ones that show up are very, very committed to the service, and they're very, very helpful. It gives them a very different look about the field. They learn things that we don't know that they don't know. And so I just want to put that information for whoever would do it with it.
If I may, we do permit students to be on many of our committees. They're currently involved in, and in the past couple of years, a big effort has been made to have students participate in the program submission review. So there's lots of opportunities where students can serve on our permanent committees. But, you know, again, when we work with the Leadership and Elections Committee, we'll be sure to sample the various committee chairs as well.
So I was just wondering if I could ask people, I know that certainly the conversation about students and who can vote and who can't is one that went around. There are several emails yesterday and it's top on people's minds. But I also want to make sure that Patty and Angela get to hear a little bit about what you all think about, you know, there is some evidence that ABCT maybe has other issues other than the voting participation rates, and maybe we're not following best practices or what's considered best practices in the field right now. And that there could be some advantages for nominating a slate, including things like getting people who wouldn't want to run. Like there's data about who raises their hand, right? And this could be a way we could, if done right, if done wrong, it would have the opposite effect, but if didn't right, this could be a way where we could get a variety, you know, more diversity on the board. It's not that it's something we, and plus also diversity in a meaningful way where people would actually be with other, you know, we don't have like one, you're not choosing one candidate at a time, right? You're choosing a group of people who, where there's a potential for them to work synergistically together. Also, we wouldn't have people who feel rejected by the organization and leave. I think that's another issue. And there was a third, but my mind is going, so maybe it'll come to me in a minute. But I'm kind of curious. I know that the student, and you know, if the nominations, if the slate went up for election, right, and we wanted students to participate in that, and by we, I mean the membership, that could certainly happen. But I'm wondering what people think about the idea of looking at a slate of candidates versus individual candidates.
Can I just put a point of emphasis on that while people are pondering your prompt, Laura, which is that in our experience in a lot of conversations in which individuals, others have nominated or pointed us in a particular direction of individuals who've done phenomenal work and are from other people's perspectives extraordinarily well poised for an election bid. I will say that we have been surprised on our committee that how often we hear from women and people of color that they don't feel ready. And that's not everyone else's perception. And so, you know, there is a question about whether perhaps potentially an application and interview process that's more of the beginning of a dialogue might help people to feel like they're more interested in entering into that kind of conversation with lots of opportunities to potentially decide that it might not work or it might not be the exact right time. But I would just say we've witnessed that in a number of conversations that have actually taken us quite aback. And so, you know, the degree to which that kind of competitive slate, the competitive approach we currently have as potentially continuing to appeal more to certain individuals. Not to stereotype, but we've heard that ourselves with some of these back channel conversations. So I guess I'm interested in hearing more feedback. Yeah. Taryn.
Hi, yeah. So in addition to everything else I do at ABCT, I am the co-chair of the Women's Issues SIG right now. So this really struck a chord with me that, yeah, women, people of color, first gen folks often feel that way because A, they've experienced throughout their life that they do have to have the bar higher, right, in order to accomplish something. And B, imposter syndrome is very real, right? And it's enforced by the academy and, you know, a whole bunch of structures in place. So that totally resonated with me. And then to the point of the slate, another much smaller, but you know, sort of like 300 member organization I'm a part of locally does a slate, and it seems to work really well. People resonate with it really well. We do, because there's so few of us, we do like voting in a meeting, and it's usually like the slate is introduced, we pause for about 30 seconds, someone moves to close the nomination process, and we vote, and it's endorsed. So I think that might be a really good way to get people involved who might not be involved, get other people sort of on board and excited about a whole slate of people. Yeah, and I think also, you know, I know the nomination committee for that organization, part of their job is just sort of like convincing people they can do it, which I'm sure is what you all have been doing too, but that might be even easier if it's like, you're not going to run against anybody. So I think it's a great idea.
Taryn, can I ask you to speak a little bit about how the slate is developed, if you have any of the details?
Sure. So I'll be fully transparent. This is actually my church. I'm a member of a Unitarian Universalist church, which democracy is part of our principles within the religion. So yeah, there is a nominating committee who is themselves elected. So like the previous year, they're elected. And then they talk amongst themselves and reach out to people. And usually I believe it's just the person who knows the person they think would be good for that position the best reaches out to them and tries to, it doesn't always, you know, the first person doesn't always say yes, and then you go on to the next person. So it's a very thankless job. They actually asked me to be a part of that committee this year, and I said, oh darn, I just joined another big committee. So but I really admire the people who do it. Yeah, and it sounds like they're doing something very similar to what Patricia and Angela are describing you all are already doing, but it would just be finding one person per thing instead of two.
Thank you. That's really helpful though to hear from somebody who's had like personal experience with that. I appreciate it.
And just to clarify, Taryn, when you say the slate, I mean, assuming there's multiple people interested in a position, that they all get to be on the slate. Is that right? That there's no like competition to make it to the slate?
So we don't have that problem. So it literally is like president, this person, vice president, this person, and they just present it as sort of one item we vote on. And again, it could be that, you know, we're around a 300 member organization instead of, I think ABCT, when it's at its full strength, is like 5,000, right? So yeah, a little bit different for that, but yeah, they present one slate. Here are the people, you know, do you endorse them? Yes or no?
If you want to speak up.
Yeah, and that sounds like, Patty, that sounds like what you were hearing from other organizations, right? It's like there might be interviews to get on the slate, but once the slate is presented, it's presented as one person
Holistically.
position, right? And then but members do, my understanding is members do have the option to say like, no, go back to the drawing table.
Correct. And I would say there was maybe one exception, and Linda and Mary Jane, you can correct me, but there was one where people were just voted to the board, and then the board amongst themselves decided who would be secretary treasurer and who would be president. And that's a little atypical. In general, it is that the nominating committee, it needs to be slightly larger than just the 3-person show we have currently in order to engage in all the reach out and interview and have all the conversation. But the committee then puts together, kind of looking at who's already on the board, puts together and thinks about, what kinds of talents or interests or expertise are we looking for currently, so that the whole thing, the whole entire, board of directors looks like it is really comes from a really strong perspective, and that there aren't so many redundancies. And then the membership gets to vote on a kind of a yay, nay, up or down for the total slate.
I just want to add here, that's why there are 2 things that you can think about. Maybe is one way is how you approach people. It's like you can send out a call for nominations, but you don't have to wait for people to nominate themselves or someone else. The membership can look amongst its committees that it's on and say, that person might be a really good at this, that. And so I'm going to encourage them to put their name in. The second, so watch the kind of how you do it. There's a friendly way that you can do it, and also the materials that you send out, that you place in your magazines, that you have on your website, that you do on your various media components. It's like you can open it up and say what you're looking for in a person who serves office, what kind of commitment it involves, that that it's an open process. We're looking for people committed to ABCT. We're looking for people who have the time to do this, and we're looking for people who come with new ideas and suggestions. That's one thing. And then secondly, when we were interviewing the main organizations that we did, the 8 organizations, I would say universally, all 8 of the people that we talked to said how great the interview process was, that a lot of groups haven't used. Because what comes up in an interview process is that you get to know the person better, so that where they might be timid at one end initially, when they're talking one-on-one with another person, you see a slightly different person.
Or there might be another position that's coming up in the organization that's not an elected position, but it's an appointed position. They might be the perfect person to be the next editor of a journal or some other role in our governance.
I want to see if there are any last minute comments, but I wanted to say that I think you're hearing from the perspective of everyone here that this is it's the middle of a conversation, but it's the beginning of engagement with membership in this conversation. So there are still many ways to share feedback and to get involved. So one is you can scan the QR code or use the HTTP address here to get to a portal that will be open. All of the feedback will come to us. So if you'd like to share with your SIG fellows or other members of the organization, please feel free. We will look at all of that feedback. We are also looking for folks to replace some vacancies that are going to happen on LNE. So if you are interested yourself in getting involved in crafting these solutions and becoming part of that leadership and elections nominating committee, you can contact Angela Fang directly as incoming chair. And Angela, I don't know if you want to say anything else about that in particular.
Yeah, I would just say, please feel free to reach out. I've got lots of ideas about things I've observed also in the elections process, and Patty and Simon and Mary Jane have been really gracious to include me on all of these, all of this work, but I'm also just getting started in this. So I think we're still considering all anything is up for grabs in terms of modifying. And I think there's a lot of structural things that have just been so deeply, set in the bylaws from so long that it's possible to just, it's great to just bring some fresh eyes to this and look at it together. So please reach out and nominate yourself or nominate some others to participate.
And then the last plug I'll make while you're all here is vote. We were very pleased to say that, in fact, we had a lot of interest this year in our typical process. So historically, I guess I've been sharing some of the weaknesses or concerns we've had in our LNE process as it's been defined in the last few years. This year has actually been a tremendously successful year in terms of the number of people who've been nominated and having complete slates. And we hope that voter participation is going to be higher than it's been in quite some time. So the portal is open from November 1st to 30th. As of October 12th, you will see the materials, the bio and position statements, etc. On the ABCT website. You'll be getting emails to your inboxes if you are, by the current bylaws, eligible to vote. So, and there'll also be ways to do that on site at the annual meeting. So we hope you'll participate in that way as well.
Patty, can I say something before?
Please.
I know we're winding down, but I don't want to take the focus off leadership and elections, but I also will be in big trouble with our incoming treasurer if I don't mention this. Right now, we have openings on our finance committee, and Barbara Kamholtz, our incoming treasurer, is looking for people who are interested in serving. And actually, this is especially if you have any experience with finance or looking to get some experience with finance in terms of professional organizations like ours, this could be a really good opportunity because the finance committee advises the board in terms of our budget. So it's a way to have a pretty significant impact. So if you are interested in serving, Barbara is looking for people. Please get in touch either with Barbara Kamholtz or Mary Jane. I'm sure I can get you in touch. So I did not want to forget that. Thank you.
And can I just say, I just stopped the chat in that moment. Laura, I was listening, but I saw that Rosara, you made the suggestion that we make this broadly available, given this is just such a small subset of the membership. And I think that was our intention, but for certain, we will be sharing this much more broadly, the recording, the opportunities for providing feedback. So poke and prod everyone you know in the organization to share feedback. We'd be happy to get it. And I guess on that note, I can bring us to a close. Thank you so much for participating. We know how precious your time is. Thank you for investing it in ABCT. We're happy to hear more from you at any point. Reach out, let us know what you think. And yeah, looking forward to hearing from you. So thank you all.